Okay, members, we'll just bear with me for 10 seconds. While we let Okay, members, welcome back to the Civic Suite, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Strategy, Finance and Policy Committee. There are no fire drills planned for this evening. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the nearest exit and make your way to the assembly point located in the Market car park adjacent to the Civic Suite building. I would like to remind you to please switch off your mobile phones or turn them to silent. Please note that this meeting will be live streamed where the proceedings are capable of repeated viewing. Please ensure your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. Once finished speaking, can you please switch off your microphone to avoid feedback noise? If you are seated in the public area of the chamber, it is likely your image will be captured by the recording cameras and result in your image being part of the broadcast. If members are not, for any reason, not present for the whole debate on an item, you should consider whether it would be appropriate for you to vote on that item. May I remind members to declare any interests and the nature of the interest at the beginning of an agenda item, and that on declaring a pecuniary interest, you are required to leave the room when that item of business is considered. Okay, members, item 1, apologies for absence and substitute members. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Mike Sutton and Councillor Chris Stanley is substituting. Councillor John Mason and Councillor Mrs. Vilma Wilson is substituting. Councillor Elliot Mason and Councillor Adrian Eves is substituting, and Councillor Stuart Wilson is absent. Item 2, non-members attending. There are no non-members attending. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of June 2024. Are the minutes agreed, members? Councillor Lambourne, were you agreeing? Oh, okay. Item 4, to receive declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, members? Nope. Item 5, public questions on notice. No public questions on notice were received. So that brings us to item 6, members. The 2023-2024 financial outturn and draft financial statements unaudited. Members, we will now consider a report of the Interim Director of Resources providing a summary of the overall financial outturn position for the financial year 2023-24. Mr. Willis, do you have anything to add to the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report sets out the final financial position subject to audit for the year 23-24, the financial year just gone. On revenue, there was a substantial underspend. Although there are many variances between the budget and actual figures, the main items were as follows. There was excess income over budgeted level of cash balances held, and interest rates remaining at relatively high levels. A second reason was that 300,000 that had been set aside for the cost of food waste separation was not needed during the year. And there was also £186,000 underspend on homelessness. This was as a result of applying external grants to offset costs. On capital, the capital programme, there was an underspend of £4.1 million. Some 2.2 million of this has been carried forward to 24-25 and is set out in Appendix 6, page 6.14. The revenue outturn and capital programme carry forwards are for noting. The decision item is to recommend to Council approval of the contribution to earmarked reserves of £1.65 million as set out in paragraph 111, pages 6.5 and 6.6. These proposed allocations will help insulate the Council in respect of future funding shortfalls and make provision for known costs that are likely to occur in the current year and in next year. Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Members, are there any questions, please? Right. Okay, Councillor Belton, please.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. Do you want me to take them one at a time?
Mr. Willis will be answering the questions. Councillor
Okay.
Belton.
Right, okay, in terms of questions first, just on a few of the underspends. I noted that we've got 47,900 additional costs on bank charges, credit and debit card charges. Now, I think I've raised this question before. A cash-rich organisation, I question why we have so many charges for banking and credit card and debit cards. So that's the first basic question. Do you want me to?
Mr. Willis, how would you like to take the questions, all at once or separately?
Chair, if the questions are on issues of detail in respect of the published draft accounts, it's likely that I'm going to be suggesting that I write to the councillor after the meeting. So I'm happy to take them all if they're of that nature.
Okay, well, we'll hear Councillor Belton's questions and then thank you.
That's
Carry
absolutely
on.
fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You noted the point about 186,000 net saving across homelessness due to grants, but I would question, could we not have done more with that funding to deliver more? Because there have been a number of issues over the past year that other organisations have had to take into their own hands to support. But again, I'm happy to take the detail in response at a later time. The same in regards to the £82,000 additional income from rents and convenience and the cemetery. I'd like to know where we can see a breakdown of what that's made up, so I think that would be useful. But then in regards to the recommendation itself, I don't have an issue generally with moving money to earmarked reserves, but in this instance, earmarked reserves are typically for projects that have already been identified. Now, whilst under 1.11, we've broken down a set of figures, it just seems to me money being thrown at potential projects to spend the 1.6. A few that I'll just point out is we've got 250,000 to enhance the corporate priorities reserve. Well, as far as I'm aware, there's nothing set aside for that. And we've only got 6 months left of the financial year. So are we just putting money to a project that isn't going to be delivered? 500,000 to support a shortfall in the funding for the capital programme. Well, the budget was only set in February, so why are we already £500,000 short? And we come on to later items that says we haven't spent much. So I'm just a bit concerned that this seems like we've had a windfall and we're just saying, let's just allocate it randomly within earmarked reserves rather than putting it into general reserves and then thinking about how it would be spent. So it's just an observation that if Mr. Willis could provide any extra information, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Willis?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on the last point about the proposed use of earmarked reserves, they've been subject to much discussion and thought by officers before they were proposed. In some cases, they are putting some money into areas where we actually know it won't even be enough. For example, the local development plan, 250,000. There's some where we already know we're incurring spending this year. So if we didn't do it, we'd end up with an overspend. So they're absolutely needed. Some of those that perhaps Councillor Belton's highlighted that perhaps are a little bit more nebulous in terms of not being a specific thing that we've already spending that we've already incurred. Corporate priorities, yes, that's 250,000 towards corporate priorities. I suggest that there's a later item on this agenda in relation to corporate priorities and corporate plan. And given the redirection of the corporate priorities, it would seem appropriate to put some funding towards that. And it is one-off funding. And I'd also say that that needn't be spent this financial year. It will be in a reserve. And if it's not all spent, then it will be carried over into the following year, subject to any council decisions. Finally, on the £500,000 capital programme, the report after this deals with needing to fund the capital programme that was agreed by council in February, and the funding was short by 1.2 million when that was set, and we needed to either reduce the size of the capital programme or find additional funding to bridge that gap. This £500,000 is precisely going towards that 1.2 million to enable us to deliver the capital programme the full capital programme that was referred to in the council report in February that agreed it. So that is absolutely needed if the council wishes to deliver this year's and the next 4 years capital programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Danielle, Councillor Belton, do you want to come back on that? Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. So if I may just ask, if we hadn't have had the windfall with the higher interest return of, I think, 1.7-ish million, would we now be in a situation where we were 1.65 million short for delivering the projects that are set out and some of the other costs that you've alluded to?
The excess investment income over budget of 1.1 million was indeed a windfall. It was only partially predicted during the year, insufficiently so, I would suggest. So in that sense, it was a windfall. And if it hadn't been for that, then the level of underspend would have been far smaller. And if it had been far smaller, then the amount of 1.65 million, it wouldn't be 1.65 million, it'd be closer to £500,000. It's simply an opportunity to say we've underspent or overachieved an income budget. We have this windfall. Rather than just leave it sitting in general balances or the working balance, which is adequate anyway in accordance with the council's policy at the level that we're holding it at. It was better to identify specifically what we use that funding for, with half an eye on not just the medium-term financial strategy that was agreed by council in February, but the next one, which we will be turning our minds to soon, the 25-26 budget and the 25 to 2030 medium-term financial strategy and capital programme. So it felt sensible to take all of that underspend, all of that windfall, and allocate it to specific reserves. Reserves, some of them are more specific than others, but specific areas of the council's operations that it was felt that it was going to be needed in this year and in future years.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Councillor Velma Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. My question is relating obviously to this agenda item, Appendix 1, paragraph 7.8, if anyone wants to look that up. It is specifically around Green Gateway trading. This report informs us that this is a wholly owned council subsidiary incorporated in September 2016, provided grounds maintenance services. Apparently, these services were terminated on the 1st of December 21, and it states that the future is to be determined. I've got really 2 points. First of all, what is going to happen to this company? Because last year, apparently, it had a deficit, which I found a bit confusing, seeing as how it hadn't been trading. And secondly, there is no financial information regarding this wholly owned council subsidiary, Green Gateway Trading, in this report at all. So is it possible, and when, please, can we have the finances of this company made known to us? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Velma Wilson. Mr. Willis.
I will provide the councillor with any information that she can't obtain from the draft accounts in respect to Green Gateway Trading. Subsequent to this meeting, what I can say is that it's not trading, even though it's called Green Gateway Trading. It hasn't traded for a while. The only transactions that are going through its accounts in at least this year and last year is some fees accounting audit fees because it's still functioning, so they're still charged to the accounts. And if there's only a cost and no income, then there's going to be a loss. So it's likely that the loss relates to that because it won't be generating any new forms of or existing ongoing forms of income. The reason why what's happening with it is no decision's been made yet. I believe it's a council decision to be made if it's to be dissolved or in some other form end trading, and that decision is yet to be made, so that's still outstanding.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Councillor Velma Wilson, do you want to come back?
Yeah, Chair, if I could come back, please. Thank you very much for that, Tim. That was really informative. The report, para 7.8 of Appendix 1, actually says the future status of Green Gateway Trading parent company will be considered by the council in this financial year. So my subsidiary question is when in this financial year? Thank you.
Mr. Willis?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know the answer to that because there's an outstanding matter that needs to be addressed before officers feel ready to bring the report before council.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think obviously Tim has mentioned it, work is being done. It was due to come to council, but it was felt that there was a review needs to be undertaken. We have, following a meeting with, I think, your group leader, committed to bring a report to Audit and Governance on the 3rd of December to regarding the matter, to update on where we are with that review and what the time scale might be. So there will be further information then, and as Tim says, it will be coming forward in due course, but there will be a report on the 3rd.
Okay, Councillor Ward, please.
Yes, look at that. Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick clarification. Was that item 7 that came up then with Green Gateway?
Councillor Velma Wilson was referring to item 6, I believe.
I was referring to item 6, Appendix 1. That was the 88-page appendix. Took a bit of wading through. Paragraph 7.8. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I just may carry on item 6, 6.5, 1.11, again, coming back to bullet point 1, it says here 750,000 to enable submission of updated local development plan. Now, we know things have changed dramatically, and it says this is only a contribution and further spends will be required. Can we get an idea of what those further spends are likely to be, please?
On that item, Councillor Ward, I think we're all aware that the evidence base will need to be reassessed as to what needs updating, but I don't know if Mr. Willis has any further information on the budgetary requirements for that.
Thank you, Chair. I would, just for public record, it's 250,000, not 750,000, the allocation proposed for the local development plan. And we believe that more will be required, but we don't know what that will be right now. What tends to happen with these types of reserves is we try to put money aside because we know there will be a cost as we review and update the local development plan as best we can. That's often what earmarked reserves are for. But we can only do that up to a point, partly because we only have so much funding available to be able to do so. But also we don't know how much we might need to allocate, and we wouldn't want to set aside large sums of money for something, then it's not used when we could have used it for something else. So what we're trying to signal in this report is we're putting £250,000 aside for it, but there could be more. But at the future date, as the chairman has said, once we know a little bit more about what's going to be the requirement, then we may be in a better position to be able to assess what the size of the future contributions need to be.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Does that answer your question, Councillor Ward?
Yeah, not really, but it's an answer.
Sometimes we don't get the answers
if I
we
can
want.
ask a bit more clarity, I can hardly hear Mr. Willis behind. I don't know if you can come a bit closer to the mic because it's quite difficult, a bit muffled. Sorry.
Okay, no problem, Councillor Ward. Mr. Willis will project his voice a little bit further. Thank you. Councillor Wootton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It must be quite a delight for you as leader to be presiding over the rather odd situation in local government of a £2 million favourable variance in the budget. So congratulations on that. That's quite a nice feeling, isn't it, in local government where we're normally talking about drastic shortage. We must never forget, Chairman, and I'm sure you don't, that we put up council tax this year by 2.99%, I believe. And just to put a rough figure on that, I believe, and I may be corrected, but I believe that's of the order of £225,000. So I think it's important just to have that when we're talking about millions. But there we are. But a few things that concern me. I don't completely want to go over, but I think it's important to stress the point that Councillor Belton has made about earmark reserves. I'm going to find it very difficult to vote for recommendation 3, not because I'm not happy to recommend something to council, but because this is really the first time that I've taken part in any debate to understand about the council's priorities. And I think this is about prioritisation of where we spend our money. And I believe that that should be a cross-party wide member debate rather than being presented in a report as a fait accompli. And I'd like to give you reasons as to why I find difficulty with recommendation 3. I think this is quite a nice position to be in. But democracy is all about hearing different points of view, cross-party, and then, in fairness, the administration making a decision. I'm not aware that that has taken place. And these are quite eye-watering sums in that respect. But specifically, and I think this report is very well laid out, but 47,900 under 1.5, 47,900 additional costs. And I want to emphasise the word additional costs on bank charges, credit, debit card. I wonder what the original budget was. I don't know offhand, but if it's additional, on the face of it, there may well be a justification, but it doesn't. That's quite a significant overspend or cost to expect. And then, of course, there's the local plan, and we know that there are additional monies, but there's a hell of a lot of money already gone into the local plan. And basically, that money, I get the impression, is possibly being written off, and we're starting all over again. Perhaps that's not a totally fair judgment, but these are my observations. And I do find difficulty with recommendation 3 until a wider debate has taken place on priorities. I would just like to, I think it's a lovely position to be in, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Wootton. I think we've only got Labour to blame for the local plan. As you members well know, we were pretty far through it, and those additional costs will be borne because of change in government. So unforeseen. So Mr. Willis, have you got anything that you can add to Councillor Wootton's comments?
Thank you, Chair. Only just to try and be helpful, the recommendation is to seek approval from council rather than to specifically approve. This committee isn't approving the allocation of reserves, because if it was doing that, it wouldn't need to go to council. This committee is seeking approval from council, and rather than just saying seeking approval from council in respect of the allocation of reserves in relation to an underspend with no detail behind that, this report seeks to provide that detail to at least inform this committee and then subsequently council tomorrow night of what's being proposed to full council.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Councillor Wootton.
Thank you, Chairman. I did make, I think, the point, but I will make it again, that the reason I find R3 difficult is the recommendation, because if you recommend from a committee, that by implication suggests that you agree with it. So it is being a bit pedantic, but it is the word recommend that I have a problem with, because that implies once you've recommended it, that we're all agreeing with it. Now, that may well be the outcome of this evening's vote, but I'm just explaining my position on the subject. So it's a recommendation rather than necessarily disagreement over the individual items within the earmark reserves, just to make that point of clarification.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wootton. All right, any other members wish to speak? Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of bits of clarification on some of the points that have been raised already, if I may. On the 1.11 about the updated local plan costs, Has there been any indication from central government that there will be any help with this? Because every council in the country is going to be affected with additional costs on this, and quite significant costs. That's one. The other one is I was aware that the report coming in December about Green Gateway was going to be about Green Gateway Trading GM Limited. There are a number of Green Gateway companies. Can I be assured that your report will be actually encompassing all of the Green Gateway companies? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. I too have asked the question about the additional cost for the new plan and the evidence base, and I don't believe that we've had any indication of any new burdens funds for that yet, but I'll let Mr. Willis answer the rest of your questions.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the possibility of new burdens funding as a general term to use for any new government initiative where there are costs associated with that initiative for local government. We're always careful about making any assumption about those, and we assume it's going to be zero unless we get the letter from the ministry confirming that we've received something, and we've had no undertaking as yet from central government that there will be any central government support for the local plan. The point about Green Gateway, my intention is that my team will look at all of the subsidiary as well as the trading company, which is the holding company in relation to Green Gateway, to ensure that what is going to be proposed to, as my colleague has said, audit and governance, and then potentially subsequently council to dissolve the company, is comprehensive of the activities of the whole group, rather than just any one. I mean, some of the entities don't do any business anyway, so it will be relatively straightforward. And where there is business being done, whether it's a subsidiary or the overarching holding company, then that will be included in any review and any recommendations coming back to Audit and Governance and Council.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Okay, so pardon? Yeah. Okay. Right, I'll just go to Councillor Stanley first, and then on to Councillor Belton. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions. Could we see a breakdown of the costs to what as expenditure to Green Gateway when before that position arrives, and also the breakdown of this extra expenditure of 49,000 on credit cards? Is that possible to have a breakdown of that to the committee? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stanley. So your first question, that will be in the report that comes forward later in the year. And I think Mr. Willis is saying, yes, of course you may have a breakdown. And I'm sure Mr. Willis will circulate that to all committee members, as that's already been asked. Thank you. Councillor Belton.
Thank you. This is more of a comment over a question. Recommendation 3 for me would have been easier to agree with if this item had come after items 7 and 8, because of that 1.6, £1 million of that pretty much directly relates to the capital programme and the corporate priorities of the administration. And we haven't yet discussed or debated those. So I feel that I'm being asked to recommend to full council £1 million of spending that can then be carried out without really hearing the detail about what that £1 million looks like. I appreciate Tim has given us rough breakdown so we can see that 1.6, but personally I would find this much easier had we've already debated items 7 and 8 to get a bit more of the meat on the bones as to where that £1 million is going. So it's just an observation, but a point I'd like to make.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Belton. Okay, members, sorry?
Nothing.
Oh, I thought you said, okay. So members, there's 2 items to note on this report, R1, R2. Are you happy to note that, members? Okay. So members, I'd like to move a motion that recommendation 3 as set out on page 6.2 of the report be approved. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hoy. Okay, members, we will now vote on the recommendation by a show of hands to recommend to full council approval of the contribution to earmark reserves of 1.65 million as set out in paragraph 1.1. All of those in favour, please, members. And all those against, members. And any abstentions, please. Okay. That's carried, members. Thank you. Okay, members, item 7. So just get onto that. We will now consider the report of the Interim Director of Resources setting out the forecast revenue and capital budget positions at end of Q1 2024-25. Mr. Willis, do you have anything to add to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out the current year forecast for revenue and capital. It also seeks approval for a recommendation to Council in relation to capital programme funding. The current revenue forecast is for a £265,000 underspend for the year. This is largely due to investment income. We are achieving higher levels of investment income so far this year. Even if cash balances and interest rates begin to fall, it's still predicted that investment income will exceed budget by £300,000. The capital programme is predicted to be fully spent. However, this comes with a caveat, given last year's level of underspend and the work that still needs to take place to deliver detailed plans in respect of some major capital projects. Members may recall that when Council approved the 5-year capital programme in February, it was potentially underfunded by £1.2 million, and there was an undertaking to address this shortfall in 24-25. Last year's outturn position, as discussed in the previous item on the agenda, has enabled the £1.2 million funding to be identified. Appendix 2, page 7.7, sets out the revised 24-29 capital programme with the 1.2 million included. The committee is requested to recommend to Council approval of the revised capital programme. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, members, any questions, please? Councillor Belton.
Thank you. I was hoping not to go first, but no one else's hands went up. Right, I just want to get a little bit of clarity, if I may, because we're looking to revise the forecasts, which include, if I'm not mistaken, 24-25, but we are still well under in terms of actual expenditure. So are we going to deliver these forecasts, or are we just reforecasting to still not hit the figures and have to adjust it again? For example, we've got the big one there, 1.4 million works as per asset strategy. Is it likely that that is going to be spent this financial year? Mill Hall, 845,000 and so on. And then obviously the spend goes down dramatically every year thereafter. I just wonder, are we front loading this only to underdeliver in year 1 and then have to revise again? So if I can get a bit of understanding on that, and then I'll come back, if I may, after.
Mr. Willis.
Thank you, Chair. There is a possibility that Councillor Belton is correct. The process in any budget monitoring report that comes before this committee is that those charged with the responsibility of managing the budget, and in the case of the capital programme, it's each capital project, they're asked, well, what are you predicting for the year? And then there's some challenge around that. And then there's an agreement between whoever the budget manager is and the finance team as to what we decide to present to members. That process has far greater rigour as the year goes on, the financial year goes on. In the first quarter, it's a bit more light touch because we know we'll guess and we'll be wrong because things happen. It's an educated guess, but we tend to default in the first quarter to, well, let's assume we're going to be on budget unless we know absolutely sure that it's not going to be. In fact, the revenue underspend forecast is unusual for Rochford. Normally it's just on budget. But we felt when we had a 1.1 million overachievement on the investment income budget for last year, and interest rates were still relatively high, and we were still holding lots of cash balances, partly because we weren't spending the capital programme. We knew we were going to have another underspend on that, which is why we've gone to press on the underspend on revenue. what we've done on capital is stick to what we've been told so far, which is that the whole of the programme will be spent. But I think we all know, officers and probably members, that there's a fair chance, depending on the speed with which the capital programme is reconfigured, if it is to be reconfigured, our ability to spend against all of those lines. You'll see from Appendix 3 that the amount spent and committed to date is less than £1 million on a revised budget of 6.8 million. So there's a long way to go. There is normally a slow start on the capital programme, even in good years when you spend it all. There tends to be a slow start and then it picks up later in the year. But nonetheless, I wouldn't want to give any guarantees to members tonight that we will fully spend our capital programme for 24-25.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Do you want to come back, Councillor Belton?
Yes, please. Thank you. That's really helpful. And now just to really understand, and again, this may be have come better after item 8 for me. So we're being asked to approve £639 for allocation, essentially. So it's to understand how those figures have been arrived at. So play spaces, for example, we've come in at 116,600 per year, which, based on probably a lot of members' knowledge around the room, doesn't go very far in the play space world. So does that money relate to a schedule of parks and ground surfacing being done? Is it just a random figure that's been arrived at? Is there any substance behind it that helps to understand what that strategy looks like? Thank you.
Councillor Belton, I asked that question as well, and Mr. Houghton has told me that a report is coming forward with a schedule of upgrades to parks. So, because I too was concerned about that. So, does that help?
Yep, I will happily wait that report.
Okay, who's next? Councillor Mrs. Vilma Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Belton and yourself for the interest taken in play spaces, because I think that's an area where a lot is promised and not too much is delivered. The current spend, I can't remember where I saw it in. I'm currently looking at Appendix 2. The figure's not there. The current spend for this year for actual play equipment is quite embarrassingly small. And it does generate the most number of emails that I receive as a local ward councillor. Thank you. Okay, my next point is I'm again referring to Appendix 2. The waste vehicle fleet, where the capital programme for this year is £380,000. Can I just ask if I could be informed as to what the split is between the new waste vehicles and the food caddies? And my supplementary question to that is, are we expecting the food caddies to be delivered this year? Thank you.
Mr. Willis, can you answer that question?
Thank you, Chair. No. I'll take it away and ask my colleague, and we'll get back to you on both the split as well as whether or not the food caddies are being introduced this year.
I do know Mr. Willis doesn't talk rubbish. So over to Councillor Stanley then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And yes, I do talk rubbish sometimes. As for the caddies, they're not going to be brought into operation. There's a paper coming out from Marcus Houghton on the subject exactly, and another paper coming out on the condition of play spaces, which will be due in I think a December paper that's coming out to council, having done a recce of all the play spaces and how non-compliant they are with all the play areas. So a wait and see. That's a wait and see time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Did you want to speak?
Yes.
All right. I'll let Councillor Hoy speak next. Councillor Hoy.
Thank you. Just very briefly, in answer to Councillor Belton's question about spending, just to reassure you, around the Mill Hall at the last Economic Development, Regeneration and Tourism Committee meeting, there was a question from a member of the public around spending on the Mill Hall. And I gave assurances then that there will be certainly some spending by around March, April time in relation to the roof. It's waiting till that period because obviously it's a bit harder sorry, nearer the microphone, a bit harder to do that in the winter months, so it will be done then. There's also an additional £200,000, which is from the UK SPF fund, which I should say is United Kingdom. I forgot what SPF's there, Shared Prosperity Fund, which will has to be spent by March, but we're hoping to spend that in this calendar year on improvements to the Mill Hall as well. So we are planning to spend some of this money, and we hope we can do, depending on tenders arriving in time and the weather, obviously.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Councillor Belton.
Thank you. Sorry, this is a little bit of an aside now, but Councillor Stanley has just raised a point about our play spaces being non-compliant, and I just want some clarity because they're supposed to be checked regularly and make sure they're safe and compliant, and if they're not, they're closed. So is that just a misspeak, or do we have an issue that we're not aware of?
Councillor Belton, I can assure you that our play spaces will be compliant and they're regularly checked by officers, and I can get that in writing for you if necessary, but I do have absolute faith in our open spaces team that is the case.
Thank you. No need for it in writing. You're on camera, so thank you.
Councillor Stanley, you can come back.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, our play spaces are checked weekly by one of the officers at the open spaces team, checked very regularly and very thoroughly as far as I'm aware. When I say that the equipment is now outdated, it's outdated to the effect of age and how the play spaces need to be brought into the 21st century. So that's the reason for my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stanley. Sorry. Mr. Willis, have you got a comment to make on that?
Not on that, but it was just to try to provide a little bit of clarity before the committee reaches a conclusion. Appendix 2. I just remind members, which might not have been that apparent from my introduction, this capital programme is effectively what was agreed at Council in February, with just the extra 1.2 million funding allocated, and it's been allocated to what were called other capital projects in the Council report, which is all those that are not the asset strategy, Mill Hall, UK SPF, Disabled Facilities Grant, or Waste Vehicle Fleet. Otherwise, it's exactly the same as it was that went to Council. So this is not an attempt to present a brand new, fully costed and considered and prioritised capital programme tonight, and it won't be for Council. All this is seeking to do is to enable the additional funding that's become available from last year's underspend so that we've got a fully funded capital programme that was agreed in February. That's not to say that there won't be a further report coming at some point that will reconfigure the capital programme and recognise that some of the numbers in this programme are out of date now. We know they're out of date because some of them are grounded in the old asset delivery programme, and we know that will come back. But this is just trying to agree the extra 1.2 million to fund the capital programme.
Thank you, Mr. Willis, for that clarification to members. Councillor Ward.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor to my right made a comment in regards to the waste vehicle fleet and paperwork coming through at a later date. I would assume that the cost of new waste vehicles are linked to food caddies, and so they would be special vehicles that would be relating to the collection of food caddies and nothing else. Am I correct or am I wrong?
Thank you, Councillor Ward, for that. Mr. Willis, do you have further information about that budget item, please? I mean, Mr. Hotton's not here tonight, is he? So we have to get back in writing.
I can ask Mr. Hutton to contact Councillor Ward. I would just remind everyone that the £380,000 was agreed at full council in February as the capital programme. That's not new. That was there and has already been voted on. And the extra 1.2 million that this committee and tomorrow's council is being asked to approve actually doesn't relate to the 380,000. There's no change on that whatsoever. It's not to say, of course, that there can't be questions on it, and we're happy to answer questions, but that just to recognise that's not something new that's being brought to the table tonight or for tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Willis, with that. Right. So, yeah, I think we're in danger of going through line by line here, and not all officers are here to answer that. So, members, if I can move on then, if everyone's asked the questions that they wanted answering. So, members, can we, I'd like to move a motion that recommendation 1, as listed on page 7.1 of the report, be approved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hoy? Right, we'll now vote on the recommendation by a show of hands. So to recommend to council approval of the revised capital programme for 2024-29 as set out in Appendix 2. All those in favour, please, members? And all those against? And any abstentions? Thank you, members. That is approved. Pardon? Okay. Right, members, recommendation 2 is to note. Is this noted, members? Okay, right. So now we move on to item 8, members, which is the draft corporate plan 2024-2028. We will now consider a report of the Director of Policy and Transformation setting out a new corporate plan for Rochford District Council 2024 to 2028 for endorsement and recommendation to full council. Mr. Birkinshaw, do you have anything to add to the report, please?
Just very briefly, Chair, to pull out a couple of key points, and firstly to thank Sam Nicholson, who's here this evening, for her work on bringing this corporate plan together in a very short space of time. As you've referred, Chairman, it does set out a new corporate plan for the council, and that's across 3 pillars. It recognises, importantly, that our primary role is to deliver good services for residents. Also recognise that we have strategic themes and ambitions, and there are 3 themes set out in the draft corporate plan of communities and homes, places and spaces, and economy and prosperity. And it also importantly recognises that it's equally important for us to be a forward-thinking and well-managed authority in order that we can deliver the ambitions and services set out in the corporate plan. The main point I think I would just draw out of the report is I think we recognise that the corporate plan has not been subject to rigorous public consultation. It's been brought forward in a fairly short space of time. However, as is referenced, it is intended that the corporate plan and the ambitions within there will be subject to further consultation alongside the budget in autumn. And I think that takes us to the point which I think Councillor Belton raised earlier around the alignment of resources and priorities. And that revised corporate plan will come to full council in February alongside the budget in order that members can consider the priorities and consider how their financial resources are aligned to delivery of them. It's not an immediate development. It will take time, but I think it's heading in that direction about providing that synergy between the two. I think importantly, it will be subject to annual review as well. So that'll be an ongoing annual cycle in order that we can consider the revenue and capital programme alongside the priorities as they change, as certain things are delivered and as new priorities arise from various sources. I think finally, Chairman, I think the corporate plan's key as well. This has been subject to liaison with committee chairman, obviously reflecting some of the priorities which they're working on within their committees and which they'll be working on going forward. And therefore, the corporate plan will be a significant benefit in bringing forward and aligning those committee work programmes as we adopt as a local authority to the new committee system of governance. I think the corporate plan will help us greatly in that. Nothing further to add, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Birkinshaw. Members, any questions? Oh, Councillor Belton.
Sorry.
Over to you.
We've
No,
got to
don't be
work now.
sorry. No.
Right, a few observations more over than questions. So there is a question: how is any of this to be delivered? Because that's what's missing. There's kind of a high level ideals of what the council wants to achieve, but I can't see any backing as to how any of it can be delivered. So that's just a general question. And for example, page 8.11, it talks about a lot of the work the council does. And we as members, we know that an awful lot of work gets done. And it's actually quite nice to see it in numbers in terms of how many bins are emptied, how many checks are done. That is really useful. On item 6, it was agreed that another £250,000 is going into transformation and improving our services to residents and the offerings that we have. But what I can't see, and this sort of talks back to the point I made earlier about these items almost being in reverse for me, is that 250,000, for example, going to improve those numbers? Are we going to see more bins emptied? Are we going to see more safety checks, more hedge cuttings? I'm just trying to understand. We've got a set of figures here, but is there an ambition to do more? Are these KPIs? I can't really understand. We've just got a lot of data within the report, but not really a lot of direction. So it's just to understand, is there a direction, or is this just for information purposes?
Thank you, Councillor Belton. Mr. Berkershaw.
I think and firstly I should have said, obviously we're asking you to approve the text and the Word version, but there will be a more colourful design version. I think this just at the moment seeks to reflect the nature of the services which we provide. As I mentioned before, I think it's important within the corporate plan to recognise that the majority of our resources and efforts do go to delivering good services. We talk a lot around strategic ambitions and particular projects such as a local development plan, but every day we have a lot of staff working very hard to deliver a range of services, and that costs us significant funding. So primarily it's around that. Obviously, in the questions you raised earlier and tonight around taking it forward and the allocation of resources to deliver, I think that's where we will seek to be moving forward around, once we've established the priorities, we have the committees to work through. Actually, how do we drive them? What's the cost of doing that? Where do we want to see those improvements coming forward within here? I think, as I've spoken to colleagues a lot around the corporate plan, as is referenced, is the principal corporate strategy of the council. And off that, we need to hang the full strategic planning framework. So the governance, the performance management frameworks, management of our risks, the organisational development plan. So this is the pinnacle of it. There's obviously work to be done to align all those forwards. And as we start to enhance and bring forward that, it may be that we need to invest resources into areas where performance is not meeting the expectations of the council that is set currently, or increase performance, which members would like to see in certain areas. But clearly that will be an articulation over a period through the committees as it goes forward. The corporate plan obviously just seeks to provide at a high level. I think as well, as I've said, we have brought it together fairly quickly in order that there is strategic direction from the council and gives us something to work towards. But I do think the points which you allude to and raise will be something which we start to see through the annual reviews and the real consideration of where members wish to see improvements. And then how do we fund that? How are them resources aligned? How will that 250,000 contribute to them? I don't profess and pretend that we're there at that point yet, but that's certainly the direction of travel that this sets us on. Hence the reason why we were keen to get a version in now, in order that we can iterate and move forward rather than continuing to strategise and keep trying to get everything in a perfect alignment.
You may, Councillor Belton.
Thank you, Paul. You mentioned in your opening that committee chairmen have been engaged and work plans. Now, I'm on a few committees and I'm not aware of any confirmed work plans. So is it just the chairman at this point that have been feeding in? And secondly, I recognise this is a draft corporate plan, so there will be work to it. Do we get reassurances as a committee and as councillors that the committees will be heard and that they will have some shape in this corporate plan? Because I'm not sure that has happened at this draft stage.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think the committee chairmen have obviously contributed, sort of to reflect the priorities that they identify as a collective administration. And obviously, it's a bit of a top-down, really. So I think what we've tried to do is for the council to set strategic direction. We'll be asking the committees to deliver against these. And we'll hopefully start to see the committee work programmes come to fruition. I think we will be committing to bring forward a standing item around committee work programmes in order that members of the committee and other members can see what's coming forward to the committee. And obviously we'll be looking for that aligned to the corporate plan. I think as we go forward and as we look towards the annual review of the plan, then clearly committees, all members through the budget setting process, through the committees will start to influence what is achieved in here. So certainly we need to develop the work of the committees and their role. Again, don't profess and pretend to be perfect at this time, but certainly it's got to be important that the members of the committee both deliver against the corporate plan and recognise that that's where the council has asked for the resources to be directed to, rather than where difficulties can come through a committee determining their own priorities and we lose that strategic direction. But certainly I think all members will want to have a say, and that'll be through the committees in the setting of the priorities and the budget and the alignment of those two cycles.
Councillor Belton.
This will just be one final point,
Yeah,
I promise. I find it difficult to recommend the plan to full council, because to me, quite rightly, this is an administrative corporate plan. This is as it stands, this is the administration's corporate plan. And as someone that's had zero involvement in putting this together and no opportunity to go through and work on it and amend it, I don't think it's for me as an opposition member to be recommending it to full council. That's not to say I'm against the full corporate plan. It's just to say that this is the administration's corporate plan, and I think it's for them to recommend to full council. And then hopefully by the time the full version comes, we'll have all had some input, and at that point possibly we'd be in a position to support a document. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Belton. Councillor Stanley, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And I know this is probably additional works that the council is going to take on with the introduction of the £300 that the government have taken away as heating, and the allowances where what they're allowed, what people are allowed for heating their homes. There is additional work by the services that we provide to get the occupants to get their house in order, if you like, to claim the benefits that they are allowed to claim. Can I be assured that the council is going to put more resources into that, in the way of, because I've read recently that there is something like 800 people that are not applying for their house.
Councillor Stanley, I think that's an item that we will hopefully be discussing tomorrow night.
Oh, right.
And that we can have a further debate in council, because it would be an all council debate on that. So
Okay,
thank you. Right. Okay. Oh, Councillor Ward, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, having read through the plan, I have to agree with Councillor Belton on the fact that really I can't support it. There's a lot of items in there that are very commendable, and I think every council, this looks like a cut and paste work with various stuff put in there. It's formulated, it's a formula that goes through. But there's one thing that really did interest me in this, was on the very last page, the very last bullet point. Really, produce a strategy. Is this administration got no strategy, that it's needing to produce a strategy?
Thank you, Councillor Ward. I think, as that's a question on fees and charges, I think we'll ask Mr. Willis if he can answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Fees and charges, there is a standard approach the council has adopted through custom and practice as to how it goes about setting fees and charges, and what information council ultimately would seek to obtain when it reaches its own decisions about fees and charges, because ultimately it's for council to make those decisions. And that's through a combination of benchmarking whatever inflation is at the moment, what levels they're at the moment, what customer response there would be to varying those fees and charges. Insofar as there's a strategy, the overarching strategy is the medium-term financial strategy that the fees and charges contribute to, along with a number of other aspects of the council's finances. We would have a policy, which is the bare bones of which I've just outlined, but not necessarily a strategy in relation to fees and charges.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Do you want to come back, Councillor Ward?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Didn't make sense at all to me. Doesn't make sense at all whatsoever. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Willis, for trying to throw some light on that. So, is there any other questions, members? No. Okay, members. So, I'd like to move a motion that recommendation 1, as listed on page 8.1 of the report, be approved. Do I have a seconder, please, members? Councillor Hoy again. Okay. So we will now vote on the recommendation by a show of hands. that the corporate plan 2024-28 attached Appendix A be recommended to full council for approval and adoption. All those in favour? And all those against? And any abstentions? Okay, members, that item is carried. Thank you, members. Okay, so members, now we'll move to item 9, which is the exclusion of the press and public. Members, I would like to move a motion without notice that the press and public, Councillor Wootton, sorry, I was getting carried away.
Thank you, Chairman. I was quite happy for you to be carried away and get to the end of your statement, actually. But look, this is always a difficult one, and it's come up before because we're in an environment where we want openness and transparency, and yet I'm sure the monitoring officer will advise us that for technical or legal reasons, it's important that we debate this as an exempt item. So, we have to respect that position. What concerns me, Chairman, is that when we had a similar report a year or two ago, and let's bear in mind that what interests the public in these things is actually not the detail that sits in the report. It tends to be a figure. What concerns me is when there was not a dissimilar report a year or two ago, that figure was in the public domain before the meeting to talk about exempt. And actually, as far as I'm aware, that figure is still supposed to be exempt, although Councillor Hoy referred to it in an audit meeting a couple of weeks ago and even said that he'd got a breakdown of the figure. So I want clarification as to exactly what is exempt, because I like to respect rules, but I like to know what the rules are that I'm respecting. And I respect if there is a legal or technical reason as to why this needs to be exempt. I have no problem with that, but I think for figures to be leaked is disgraceful, whatever political administration is in place.
Okay, right, Councillor Wootton. So for clarity on this item, I'll ask Mr. Birkinshaw as our monitoring officer to explain the exclusion of press and public and why we do it and the rules that we're bound by under that, because we do have new members here as well. So just for ultimate clarity, is that okay? Could you do that, Mr. Birkinshaw?
Give it a go.
Yep, he will give it a go, and hopefully everyone will understand the seriousness of excluding the press and public and the act that we are bound by.
Yeah, just briefly, and obviously be familiar to many members, most of the council's business is transacted in public. However, legislation, as is set out in the agenda, Schedule 1 of the 72 Act, does provide for the press and public to be excluded from consideration of certain items to enable the council to transact its business. And there are a number of paragraphs where potentially, for example, it's information related to an individual person, the financial affairs of people, where the council proposes to take legal action, etc. And it's considered to be in the best interest for that to be debated and considered in private. There is a further test in terms of whether the council believes that the public interest in retaining the information outweighs the public interest in disclosing that information. So there is a further consideration that's given. I think in terms, and obviously it's recommended here whilst we're in the as is set out in the agenda item, a settlement agreement is currently being considered, then the detail of that is beneficial in the council and the public's interest in terms of protecting its funds, for that to be dealt with by members in private session with the press and public excluded. I think in terms of the specific issue that has been raised, as I understand from colleagues, that the figure previous that you refer to is in the public domain and was disclosed. And I think there is intentions further to this. Obviously matters are not always exempt. Once they've been agreed and discharged, then the benefit in retaining the exemption sometimes goes away, and therefore disclosure of that information becomes the most appropriate course of action, as happened previously, and as I think is expected to be the case on this matter as well. However, at this stage, while the council's still determining the position and how it wishes to proceed, then that's considered, Chairman, to be best done in private.
Okay, members, is that clear? Everyone's happy with that, right? So Councillor Hoy wants to make a point of personal explanation, I believe. Councillor Hoy.
Yeah, thank you for raising that, Councillor Wootton. The information I provided at the audit committee was from an email sent to me by an officer, and everything in that email was confirmed by the then monitoring officer, whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head because I can't access my emails at the moment, that everything in that email was in the public domain, and that was confirmed by the monitoring officer. So everything there. I've forwarded that email to Mr. Willis as well, but it's very clear. Mr. Hunkin, that was it. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, I don't want to get into too much debate, but Councillor Wootton.
Thank you very much indeed. It's just a shame that perhaps the wider members don't know when stuff ceases to be exempt, because clearly Councillor Hoy was privy to an email, and I really welcome and appreciate his. But it's difficult to know when the stuff becomes non-exempt. But thank you.
So I believe there is a review, and it's in the constitution that there's a yearly review done of exempt items, and they are published. But anyway, right, we'll move on from that if we may, and get on with business. So, members, item 9, exclusion of the press and public. Members, I would like to move a motion without notice that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining business on the grounds that exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 would be disclosed. Can I have a seconder? Yep, Councillor Hoy seconded that. So, members, whilst we just stop the recording. Oh, sorry, yep, sorry. Can we take a vote on that, members? All those in favour? Yep. So that's unanimous. Okay, thank you. So we'll just wait for the recording to stop and all the public that rushed here tonight to leave.